Hello everybody, my name is Nietona. I am someone who's been going through learning Japanese through the process of AJATT, MIA, Refold, I don't know what you want to call it. I'm probably going to refer to it as AJATT throughout most of this video, as that's what I usually refer to it as. I have a bit of experience going through the Refold website and everything, but ultimately the method that I stuck to originally was a lot closer to AJATT, predominantly just because at the time the people that I was looking at, in terms of this person has done what, did AJATT, and as a result I kind of stuck to what they did. This includes people like Matt vs Japan, for example, which I imagine if you're watching this video you almost certainly know who that is. But he did AJATT, and that was partially why I did AJATT. Anyway, who am I? I am just a person that used to engage a lot with Japanese media when he was young. I mean, I still do, but I certainly did back when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, I watched a lot of anime early on. I had a period where I just watched a lot of anime. This didn't really last too long. It was something that I enjoyed doing, but there were other things I enjoyed more. I never really enjoyed manga. I never really got into manga, but it was something that I knew about. It just wasn't something I really engaged much in. What I did do was I played a lot of video games, and of the video games I played, almost all of them were ones that tended to come out of Japan. So thinking stuff like Disgaea, I know I played Castlevania, BlazBlue, a lot of Japanesey games. There were not a lot of Western games that I really played much of, but either way, especially playing a lot of Japanese games, I ended up kind of obviously curious about Japan. As I grew up, I thought it would be cool to try learning Japanese, but I always kind of put it off as something that, oh yeah, I might do that in the future. That'd be cool to do. But I never really thought of it as something that I would do. Today, I'll get to that actually. Yeah, when I was younger, I did have a couple times where I did have a time or two where I did think, okay, now's the time. Let's get started and actually try learning Japanese. Now I did what I imagine a lot of people do when they first start learning. You type into Google how to learn Japanese, and something somewhere recommends you some kind of textbook. So I bought Genki, tried that, didn't get through Genki. Did get most of the way through, but didn't get through because it's a textbook. And in my opinion, they're not too conducive to language learning. I stopped doing that and gave up. And that was probably sometime in late secondary school, high school. I then went to university, and tried to do it again. Not with Genki. This time I actually contacted a tutor on italki. She walked me through a few simple Japanese lessons, but I didn't end up having the funds to continue. This would have been around the middle of 2015. I lacked the funds to continue. I was a university student, and I dropped out and stopped doing it. Gave up again. Of these two cases, I eventually ended up, I didn't really have much knowledge by the time I finished. I would say that I was close to zero, a total beginner still, regardless of the things that I knew. I mean, certainly if I wasn't then, I definitely would have been when I started AJATT, which wouldn't have been for another like half a decade from there. Anyway, now I had a friend that was also interested in this kind of thing. His most notable quality, for the sake of this video, is that he's from Sweden, so that's nice. So towards the end-ish of 2021, he introduced me to AJATT. At the time, it was still AJATT, and it was around the time, at least I believe, where Matt was either setting up or had set up a mass immersion approach. I remember that being a big thing sometime around the time. Anyway, it was sometime around the end of 2021, towards the middle to the end of 2021 anyway. And I watched Matt's videos and I was kind of enraptured by his perspective. It was something I'd never really considered, because especially as a beginner, it's very easy to just think of native material as, oh, I'm not ready for that. And he puts it quite well when he says, people want to wait until they're fluent to jump into native material, which doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense. And this struck a chord with me, because the way he put it, it just kind of made sense to me. I just thought, well, if you pick up piece after piece, eventually you'll start building a fully functional model of how everything works, right? And then on top of that, he was recommending this fancy book called RTK, Remembering the Kanji. So at the time I thought, well, he got good with this. I want to get good. I'm going to do what he did. As well as that, obviously, my friend was kind of pushing me towards this. I bought RTK and I went through RTK. I did, how much was it? It must have been something like 10 to 20 kanji a day. I don't remember exactly how much I did, but I did it all old style, so keyword on the front, kanji on the back, and I would draw it out every single time. I ended up having scrapbooks full of kanji that I drew. This was the bulk of what I did for the first half of the 3 to 4 months it took me to complete RTK. 3.5 months, I think it roughly took. This was the bulk of what I did for that time. Then towards the latter half, I picked up grammar a lot on the side. I know that the guide said not to do it, but I didn't just want to do kanji. I felt like I was going to tear my hair out. It was boring. I wanted to get into more meaty stuff, and I knew I was going to have to do grammar afterwards, but I didn't want to be stuck doing grammar and having to go through another thing that was going to take ages. So I started that kind of on the side. And I figured that I could just go back to it and redo it if it turned out that there were any big problems around them side by side. I completed the grammar guide that I chose was actually Cured Ollie's guide. If you can get past how she sounds, then it's a really good guide. Certainly, I think it's one that runs through everything in a natural way. Now, I got towards the end of RTK and finished it. I never missed a day. I just knuckled down and completed it. From there, once I finished, I was ecstatic because I didn't have any more new words to learn. I should probably mention I only did RTK 1. I never did RTK 2 or 3. I know everyone says not to do 2 anyway, but I didn't do 3, and I've still not done 3 to this day. I doubt I ever will do 3. Maybe I will. Don't know. Doubtful though. But who knows how I'm going to feel in however much time. I'm sure there'll be some time where I'll want to learn to write kanji from hand, but that's not it, not there. Either way, right now I have no plans to do RTK 3. That's everything I really have to say about it right now. Anyway, I finished RTK, and from there I I was excited because this is the bit where it gets good. You jump in, you just start engaging with native material. I was like, I'm going to read manga, I'm going to watch anime, it's going to be great. And I jumped in, and I was like, and I thought, yeah, don't care that it's slice of life. I'm going to read simple manga. Picked Yotsubato, and for anime, I picked my first anime was Kiniro Mosaic. And it was rough. It was really, really hard. I was absolutely getting destroyed because I didn't have any real vocabulary behind me. All I had was a mishmash of scant pieces of vocabulary that I knew, as well as, well, knowing kanji. I did my best to try and grab as much as I could in terms of sentence mining. At the time, I had Anki set up and everything. Well, obviously, I did, but I had everything set up so that I could sentence mine. And it was rough. It was really hard. I was just getting my ass kicked by these baby-level Japanese works. I know a lot of people criticize the idea of using Yotsuba for your first thing because of the slang, but regardless, it is fairly simple, easy Japanese, and it was kicking my ass. Same with Kiniro Mosaic, although I had a bit of an easier time with listening at this time because I wasn't getting stopped by every word, and I could kind of follow along a lot based on the visuals. Probably helps that that was really simple as well, but anyway. At this point, I decided after a little bit that I needed to get more vocabulary under my belt. At this point, I had read Yotsuba. I'd started reading Sailor Moon, which was also quite easy outside of the handwritten sections, which are quite difficult. I'd watched, I think, Kiniro Mosaic. I'd watched Non Non Byori, which I actually really enjoyed. I'd watched Gochumon wa Usagi desu ka? And I'd watched, there's a few other things I'd watched. I think I'd watched I've watched Maid Dragon, Kobayashi-san, or I don't know, Dragon Maid. I don't remember what it's called in Japanese. Regardless, Kobayashi-san's Dragon Maid. I watched that anyway, and I branched out and tried watching Made in Abyss, which kicked my ass even harder. I just felt so lost during Made in Abyss. I was still able to follow along, and I still actually loved my time, but in terms of the language, I was absolutely left in the dust. And from here, I just kind of realized I needed more vocabulary. This is where I made the decision to pick up a core deck. So I picked up the Core 2K. I definitely wasn't going to do the Core 6K. That seemed like a colossal waste of time, because I'd rather just get a very strong basis and then learn everything else through sentence mining. I picked up the Core 2K, got part of the way through it, and afterwards there were some difficult family circumstances in my life that led to me having to take a bit of time away from AJATT. During this time, I kept repping my Core 2K deck, adding new cards in, but that was basically all I did for a bit. This, I would say, went on for the majority of a year. It was towards the end of 2022 that I ended up going back to AJATT. I always knew I was going to go back. It was just due to the circumstances at the time. There was someone I needed to be there for, and I needed to look after them. Anyway, towards the end of the year, that person started to feel a lot better, was in a much better place, and was able to go back to her everyday life. From that, I jumped back into AJATT. This was, well, I finished Core 2K first. I never missed a day for that either. In fact, I will say for Anki, I have never missed a day, period. Never ever. My streak is at this point approaching 1,000 days. I'm not sure exactly how long it is. I don't know. I'll look at it sometime or something. But whatever. Either way, I know it's. I believe it's around 910 to 920 days that I've been on. That I have my Anki streak, and I've never missed a day. I never plan to either. There's no way I will miss a day at this point. I would have to be absolutely. I'd have to be like in a coma or something to miss a day. But I finished Core 2K, and with that under my belt, I felt much more confident jumping into sentence mining and jumping into native material. It was still really hard. I can remember finishing Core 2K and going into Toradora, and thinking, I was going to understand it, thinking that it was going to be a hell of a lot easier. How wrong I was. It still wiped the floor with me. It still kicked my ass. But due to the words I learned in Core 2K, there were a lot more I+1s that I was able to grab from it. So even though I still wasn't comprehending much at all, it had pushed me up to for it being like the next rung. So I was able to start grabbing sentences that I wouldn't have been able to before. I would consider the only time that I really did proper AJATT to have started from this level. Now, did I start from zero there? Obviously not. I had a bit of time beforehand, but regardless, I would consider that to be my proper starting point for when I started properly AJATTing. This will be around late 2022, so you're looking at sometime around December 2022, I think. There's a bit of leeway there, but either way. From there, the first 3 months of that were really hard. There was a lot of just white noise, a bunch of stuff. I just wouldn't understand anything, and all I was doing at that time was kind of grasping on for any words or anything that I would at least recognize. But it felt pretty overpowering. I actually still did passive listening during this time. I did a lot of passive listening. I would just load whatever shows that I had watched onto a MP3 player, and I would listen. I was really lucky with this actually, in that my job, I worked at the time it's in the field of accounting, but I was certainly, I know, like, I was pretty lucky because my particular job allowed me to. I was able to work with an earphone in. This was absolutely insane because I know a lot of people say that passive listening doesn't help at all in that first while, but I definitely felt like it helped. So at the time, I was probably getting around anywhere between 4 to 8 hours passive listening every single day, just between having my earphone in at work. Obviously, it varied. I wouldn't have it in while I was being talked to, for example, or if I had a really important thing and needed to really focus, I couldn't have it in. But the majority of the time, I was able to have it in, and that was a big deal. During my lunch times at work, those times I actually usually wasn't able to immerse, because usually during that time my partner would just be waking up and I would call with her. But I would passive immerse pretty much the rest of the time. I would then get home from work, I suppose I should just, at this point, I should just give an overview of what my days look like. So I'd wake up in the morning, and this isn't too dissimilar to how it is now. I'd wake up in the morning, and the first thing I would do is I would immediately just start rapping. And to this day, the first thing I do in the morning is my reps. I get them out of the way. If I don't do them, I feel like they weigh on me for the rest of the day. Until I do them, they're this weight in the back of my mind. And this is why I said earlier that I don't think I'll ever miss a day of Anki, because if I would have ever missed a day, it would mean that I would have had to have ignored that for the entirety of the day. It's just not possible. If I haven't done my reps, in my head, I'm just going, I haven't done my reps yet, need to do my reps. They just, I have to do them. All the way up until I delete Anki, I'll be like this, I imagine. But I would get up, I would immediately start repping. I'd then go downstairs and get breakfast. And I'd shower. I've never been able to passive immerse in the shower because I can't actually hear anything over the roar of my shower that thunders down. So instead, I just don't. So I would do my reps, I'd shower, and then I'd get ready and I'd go to get on the bus to go to work. During that time, while I was on the bus, I would complete the rest of my reps. I always completed them on the bus. I never had a time where there wasn't enough time. Having to get on 2 separate buses to get to work will do that to you, I suppose. One benefit being lazy enough to not bother to learn to drive, eh? I would then get to work, my passive earphones would go straight in, and I would passively listen for the entire day. Except for lunch, of course, I've already mentioned. I then, on the way home for these first 6 months, I would passive listen. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes I would passive listen. Sometimes I would instead pull up something on my phone and give myself a bit of a break in preparation for getting home. Once I would get home from work, I would then do my study with regards to my career. So I would do around 1 to 2, usually 1, because I didn't want to do more after working 8 hours. 1 hour of study towards educational subjects regarding my career, and as soon as I was done with that, it was all. I would just do immersion for however many hours I could. Usually it was around 2 to 3 hours every night. I would try and split it evenly between listening and reading. I'll talk more about reading versus listening later, but I would try and split it evenly at the time between reading and listening. And then during the final hour or so of my day, I would create Anki cards for the 10 or so. It would usually be around 10, slightly more usually, sentence cards that I mined during my time immersing. And in the meantime, I would obviously talk to my partner. During this time, because I was at work, and this is true also for the majority of the time that I've been AJATTing in general, I tried to stick myself, and I tried to limit myself to around 10, slightly more than 10 Anki cards in any given day, because I could not afford for my Anki time in the morning to be too great, or else I wouldn't be able to complete it before I got to work. And then after that, actually completing your work would be really rough. And I didn't want it to spill over, so I didn't. I kept myself in check like that, and grew my Anki cards that way. From there, that's what I would do day in, day out. It was really tough. In the first 3 months, I understood basically nothing whatsoever. It felt like there was a massive wall that I was just slamming my head into. and I feel like I was really getting anywhere. This was fine. This was exactly what is always going to be the case, I think. In those first 3 months, that is definitely the most challenging time during your time learning Japanese. And you just kind of have to force your way through it, I think. I think, especially nowadays, depending on which way you do, it can be a little bit easier, but you're always going to face one massive wall when you're just starting out. Towards the as I got past the 3 month mark, as I got past that, what I found was that with lookups, I was able to quite easily follow what was going on in my immersion material. My immersion material at the time was still pretty easy, but I found that I was much more easily able to follow what was going on. And this was kind of a point of happiness for me. It was like a sign that this is actually working. I mean, obviously I knew it was going to work because it's just logical, but it was working, and it was very reinforcing to finally feel the positive effects of it. After this 3 month period, the next 3 months after that were also still really tough. During this time, I started to feel like I was in a cycle. This cycle would kind of start with me feeling like this cycle would kind of feel like I would get to a point where I would learn something and I'd feel like I was getting better and I'd feel really happy and confident. And then I'd go to immerse and my immersion would kick the shit out of me and my confidence would drop back and I'd think, oh my god, I suck at Japanese. My Japanese sucks. It's really bad. I would then think, all right, well, the only way I'm going to get better is to keep immersing. So I'd immerse and then I'd come across a bit that I would understand and I'd maybe have a session where I would feel like I understood a fair amount, and I'd start to get pretty confident again. I think, oh, it's working, it's really working, and then I'd go to immerse the next time, and it'd kick the crap out of me, and I'd again slink back, and that was what the cycle was, and that cycle existed for months. And this is kind of where I would say I went past. I kind of got to the point where I was more of an advanced beginner. Maybe advanced beginner to very early intermediate. I don't know. It depends on how you measure this stuff. Hell if I know. I feel like the only time in which I'm going to know when I truly became, I guess, intermediate is by the time I get to the point where I'm incredibly advanced. But regardless, that was the cycle that I found myself in. I was still picking up a lot of new stuff regularly. I was still picking up massive chunks of language regularly that were really common, and as a result, I would see them everywhere. This was the time when I would very easily pick up a word or phrase or a grammar point or something, and I could pick that up one day, and then by the end of the week, I could have seen that just a whole bunch of times. That's how common these things ended up being. That was quite reinforcing. It was something that made me want to continue because it felt like I was making progress, because I was. Then as I got to around the 6th month, around this point, I ended up feeling like, well, I ended up obviously knowing that I needed to do the monolingual transition. Up to this point, I was still using bilingual cards, and I thought to myself that I'd left it really late because the people that I'd seen that had done AJATT had kind of jumped into the monolingual transition really early on. Some of these people said, because I know Brit versus Japan, for example, said you should probably do the monolingual transition before you get to like 1,000 cards or whatever. He said something like that anyway, something along those lines. Now I hadn't done this. It must have been, I don't know, I had a lot of cards. I think I probably was somewhere between 3,000 to 4,000 cards, sentence cards, in bilingual definitions, and I hadn't gone monolingual yet. This is counting Core 2K, I should mention. Now, at this point, I thought, all right, well, what's the logical thing to do? Just go monolingual. Do your best to go monolingual. Now, I didn't do Katz's method because when I saw Matt's video talking about the way that he recommended to do it, that made a lot more sense to me, and I don't like dictionary diving. I have never liked it. I've never done it really. I think I've done it a few times, and you always end up just kind of losing the string of what you were even looking for in the first place. You just get lost in the dictionary, basically. It's like a labyrinth. So, yeah, I did what he suggested, and I created an extra Anki deck called Jishonobun. Now, this Anki deck I used to basically it was an attempt to take vocabulary from the dictionary and make flashcards from it using example sentences. Basically the exact method Matt says. Most of the dictionary words I used were bilingual. Some of them were monolingual when I could understand the monolingual definition, which was not terribly often, especially in the beginning. Nowadays it's a lot more often, but back then it was almost all the cards I were making were still bilingual. It was, if I had to put it to a ratio, for example, I would say maybe 1 in every 10, 1 in every 20 sentence cards I made was monolingual. I was still basically doing it bilingually, but I was grabbing words from the dictionary with enough regularity that I knew I was on my way to making the monolingual transition. I knew that it was supposed to take months. I didn't know how many months it was supposed to take, but I knew it was supposed to take months. So I didn't sweat it. I just thought, it'll come when it comes. Eventually I'll kind of slide over and I'll start using the monolingual definitions more. I figured that I would probably, when I got to that point, throw out the bilingual definition dictionary. Bilingual dictionary, you know what I mean. But the further along I went, the more I guess I came to realize something that kind of hadn't been too obvious when I learned about the monolingual definition everywhere, and that was basically that it is not like, when you completed the monolingual transition, it's not like you can still understand 100% of your definitions in, it's not like you can still, it's not like you can suddenly understand 100% of your definitions in Japanese. You still can only understand some of them. There'll still be some definitions that you can't understand in Japanese, and this is where I think, for the most part, they're going to be things like, obviously, concrete nouns, stuff that you can just type into Google Images and it'll give you a picture that'll explain it better than the definition probably ever could. But there's still the odd word or two that understanding the monolingual definition is really difficult. And for that, the bilingual definition is still a really good aid, I find. But either way, I pushed through and kept immersing, and it took me probably about 1 to 2 months to truly get to the point where I felt comfortable, really comfortable using the monolingual dictionary. And at that point, even though I still used the bilingual dictionary and still found it useful, I considered myself still probably more or less done with the monolingual transition, as it were. There'll be a day that comes where I won't ever need to use the bilingual dictionary again, I imagine. But if I were to just toss it away now, I feel like I would be depriving myself of a resource that can still provide some value. So even today, like, on the odd occasion, I will still look something up in the bilingual dictionary. Now, I should mention, around the 6 to 7-ish month mark, it might have been a bit before then. To be honest, I'm a bit fuzzy on exactly what time it was, but regardless, it was around this rough time frame. You're just going to have to take my word for it. I felt like my comprehension, which I thought had gotten pretty good, suddenly got worse. Now, if you have read the Refold site, I remember, I'm pretty sure this was mentioned on there as well. This is something that happens to a lot of people. You get good enough to, it's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect. You get good enough to realize how much you suck. You get good enough to suddenly see all these things that you couldn't see before, that you don't understand or don't know. And this happened to me. But I recognized it was happening because I'd read about it. And so when it happened, I recognized that it was something that was a natural thing. And I felt like it was awesome. I thought, yes, I'm making progress. This actually means I'm getting better. A bit contradictory, but, you know, the power of knowledge. What do you want me to say? Towards as we went between as I got kind of between the 6 to 12 month mark, I still felt pretty. I started to feel like I was getting better and better. Picked up a lot more common vocabulary, and pushed through a lot with my sentence mining. I've always been really strict with Anki. As you've probably gathered from the things I've said, but every morning I do it. I always make sure to add around 10 cards. I always make sure to add cards at the end of the day. I'm not one of the people that. Well, I know a lot of people struggle with Anki and struggle with using it. I'm not one of those people. I'm capable of just grinding Anki. I don't think it's the best use of my time, but as a supplement, it's so useful that I'm perfectly fine with cramming the living shit out of Anki when I can. I'll go more on that in a bit, but yeah, towards the latter months, around months 7, 8, 9. These months, I felt like things still felt really uncertain. I still felt like I was kind of not understanding the majority of the things I was paying attention to, and it was still really rough. I didn't feel confident at all. I kind of still felt am I ever going to get better? Which it always feels really paradoxical because, I mean, obviously you're going to get better. You're continuing. And you've gotten better all the way up until that point, so why would you just randomly stop getting better? It's illogical, but it's how I felt. I still felt am I ever really going to get better? Am I ever going to understand this? Am I ever going to pass past the point that I'm at? And yeah, that was how I felt. I was still going through the cycle that I mentioned before, the cycle of pain. I've never named it. There you go. The cycle of pain. It's awful, but I could still understand the plot of pretty much anything that I wanted to watch, but I would occasionally miss like key details and everything. It was around this time that, for example, so I've got Symphogear on screen. I've kind of had that. One of the Symphogear posters, the one for G, which was my favourite season. It was around the tail end of this time that I watched Symphogear, and there was a lot that, even though like I understood the plot of what happened, there were a lot of small things that I missed. And one thing that comes with learning to accept ambiguity, which I was pretty good at, I learned to do that really early on, is that when you understand something, you don't feel confident that you fully grasp it. So, kind of to use an example, I felt like I was understanding Symphogear, but I didn't feel like I fully understood Symphogear. I didn't feel confident that I fully understood it. And this was for good reason. I didn't fully understand it. But this kind of thing happens a lot. And around this time, that was kind of where I was at. To a massive extent, that kind of still is where I'm at. But again, I'll get to that later. My comprehension was fine, but not great. I still had obviously regularly said to myself, I still had times, as obviously part of the cycle that I mentioned before, where I felt like, yeah, clearly I am going somewhere. But even during those times, I would remind myself, just remember, you still suck at Japanese. Certainly, any thoughts of output or anything were out of the question. But regardless, I pushed through. Now, months 9 to 12, that was where I felt like a lot of things came together. Now, I'll talk about counting month month 10 and 11 was October, November. I'm just going to count them as that anyway. 10 and 11, October, November. They were kind of as normal. November is where things really started to come together for me. And there was one simple reason for this, and that was that I quit my job. I got really... It's basically, I was in a position where I couldn't really progress in my career, so I quit my job for that, and due to my unique circumstances, I had a holiday planned in December with my partner, who had become my fiance earlier in the year. In November, I quit and I went absolutely mental with AJATT. I started really AJATting hard. I wasn't too concerned with applying for jobs. In November, so this was from the 21st onwards, I started immersing pretty much all day. As a result, like my passive immersion basically dropped to 0. I basically haven't passive immersed in a long time. However, my active immersion shot up. So I went from active immersing maybe anywhere between 2 to 4 hours any given day to active immersing anywhere between like 7 to 10 hours any given day. Like active immersing like an absolute madman. All the way up until that point, my schedule had remained the same as it kind of always had. So I would Anki in the morning on the way to work. I would passive listen at work. The only real difference I had towards the tail end was that I started active immersing on my bus journey home using phone games usually. And then I would continue active immersing once home, because by that point I'd kind of finished my studies for my career as well. So by that point, I was able to devote a lot more of my time to it. Regardless, I quit my job, and from there, what I ended up doing was I would wake up in the morning, I would do my reps, and this would take me, whereas before it would have taken me about an hour, it would now take me about anywhere between an hour and a half. From there, I would hop on my PC and I would just immerse. I would just immerse. I would do anything else I needed to do, but I would immerse for however long I wanted. Usually I would immerse for as much as I could, unless people wanted to do something with me. So, for example, a game that people wanted to play with me at the time was Destiny 2. Please don't laugh. But either way, that was a game that people wanted to play with me. For example, my brother and one of our friends. And we would play that with my fiance as well. So I would I put that in Japanese, and for all the good it did, considering you don't really have to read a lot in that game. And that was pretty much like that kind of thing was the only situation in which I wasn't spending time actively immersing. But I, at the time, had kind of dropped manga. I didn't really do a lot of manga reading. I still was watching anime, using that as my predominant immersion material for listening. At the time, I had read one visual novel to completion. I hadn't read any light novels, but I tried reading that one isekai about the slime. I'm going to be honest, I got bored, so I dropped it and went back to things I found fun. I can feel people who really enjoyed that absolutely seething right now. But either way, I do plan on going to reading more light novels, or reading light novels, but regardless, let me go back to where I was anyway, but I keep trying to go off track. Yeah, this is a bit of a ramble. I'm not going to pretend I don't have some degree of notes to the side to kind of stare at, but for the most part, I'm just kind of letting my head do whatever it wants, just ramble on. Either way, a lot of my time at this point was dedicated to reading. I was trying to focus more on reading because I felt, and to an extent do still feel like reading will get you to a higher level ability a bit quicker. I can remember because, especially early on, I felt like, whereas when you watch, for example, if I'm watching anime, it's possible to miss in small parts of sentences that you don't understand, because you can kind of skip over it and still understand what was being said based on the visual aspect of the medium. But when you're reading, you don't have that option. Even when you're reading something like a visual novel, if you don't understand every part of a sentence, you can still end up being absolutely left behind and not understanding. For example, if there's a grammar point that you don't understand, when you're watching anime, you may still be able to understand it, or understand what was being said. But if you're, for example, reading a text-heavy thing, you may still not be able to properly parse the sentence, and this is why I feel like reading is really, really powerful, because reading forces you to engage with it. It forces you to get tripped up by it, because you will trip over that bit that you don't understand, and forces you to kind of look it up. And even if you struggle to look it up and don't really remember it, it fills in a little bit of your head, and you'll remember it for the next time you see it. And the next time you see it, you suddenly have two different points of reference. And that's so powerful, I find. So at this time, I was trying to focus more on my reading than my listening. So although I was certainly still watching anime, um, I was doing a lot more reading, and most of this was in video games. I kind of dropped manga at this point, so I was reading a lot of video game based stuff. One of my main goals for when I started trying to learn Japanese was I didn't want to have to wait for the localization of the next game in a particular series I'm I'm a big fan of. Now, if you're already a fan of this series, you already know what I'm going to say because you're probably like, "Oh, is it another one, another person who's gotten into it for that?" Yeah, it's the Kiseki series. Um, Now, I've played through the majority of Sky FC in Japanese at this point. Um, the only reason why I've not finished it and carried on is because I keep getting distracted because I jump about a lot with regards to my reading material. Um, Early on in the process, I used to stick to one particular thing. So during the first 6 months, during the first 6 to 9 months, I would usually try and stick to like one particular reading source. So, for example, I can remember in February, around month 3, I played Ghost Trick in Japanese. It's kind of a visual novel-based game. If you haven't played it, you need to fucking go and play Ghost Trick. It's so good. Is in one of the best stories I think I've ever experienced here. I can't recommend it enough. Go into it spoiler free. You won't regret it. Anyway, shilling aside, because certainly God knows Capcom isn't shilling it. Hope it was Capcom that made it now. But either way, I played that in Japanese, and I just focused on that the entire month. Recently, and over the past few months, I've not been like this. I kind of jump about between things based on what I want to play or what I want to read at any given time. It's only really anime that I tend to stick to the same thing for at this point. Now, yeah, because I jump around a lot, I get a lot of different types of input, which I think is pretty good. But at the time I was focusing more on my reading, so I've played a lot of Kiseki. I've played a lot of games like Genshin Impact. The rule I tend to go for is one that you probably heard before: buy natives for natives. Now, anyone who knows anything about Genshin has probably turned around and just said, "Hang on, you've just contradicted yourself. You're an idiot." Now, you may be true, that may be correct. However, I feel like it's also important to consider the kind of context for all this, because although something like Genshin is obviously a Chinese game, the Japanese translation is likely going to be done by Japanese people, and certainly it seems to be it seems like a pretty good translation, and I think basically you'll get to a point quickly. The point I'm trying to make anyway is that you'll get to a point as you immerse where you'll kind of be able to discern what you should and shouldn't be using for comprehensible input, what is and isn't going to be accurate Japanese. And obviously as a beginner you have no flipping clue. And you might think that, I don't know, as a beginner you won't have any idea. But the further along you get to a point where you can kind of understand what is and isn't a good choice for comprehensible input. And that's why, even though Genshin is a Chinese game, I think something like that is fine. It's certainly bloody wordy enough. But yeah, anyway, I've digressed a lot. During the 21st of November onwards, I poured just time into immersion all the way up until, and this was for like a solid almost month, all the way up until around the 18th of December-ish, where my holiday begun. And this was time I'd specifically set aside for my fiance and myself. This has probably been my biggest, I guess, break from AJATT since I started doing it. I still do my reps every day, but and obviously all my devices have been in Japanese for God knows how long, almost the entirety of the year. And I still engaged with Japanese to an extent every day, but to say that it was a decimated amount compared to the average amount would be kind of underselling it. I did very little Japanese from that point up until the new year, and then holiday ended around the new year, and ever since then it's been back to immersing the same way I did from November to December. Now, that was kind of a messy journey, especially if you consider the full thing. And yeah, it's messy as hell. That's just the way it is. Now, I've made a lot of progress during this year, and that's what I'm going to talk about next. The progress that I've made is astounding. At this point, I'm obviously a bit past the year mark, but I feel very confident in my ability. I mentioned the cycle of pain earlier in this video. I've not had that cycle in a very long time, and I don't think I ever will again. Sometime between the 9 and 12 month mark, I kind of grew out of that, basically, because what I found was that I got to the point where I suddenly found engaging in Japanese a hell of a lot easier. I got to the point where I can look at Japanese and it's not even slightly intimidating. In fact, it feels kind of natural at this point. Obviously nowhere near as natural as English. English I can just glance at and just be able to tell what's going on. But with Japanese it is a hell of a lot easier. I know in the beginning it was very intimidating looking at big walls of Japanese text. Not anymore. At this point, looking at any kind of Japanese is not intimidating at all. And I feel comfortable reading pretty much anything. Certainly the tools I've acquired make it easier. I'll talk about those in a few minutes. But yeah, I have found that jumping into things that people would consider difficult is not intimidating. They will likely still be, to an extent, difficult for me, but I have a good enough foundation at this point that I feel confident in taking on pretty much anything. When I went on my holiday, I had 6,500 sentence cards in my Anki deck, or in all my Anki decks put together. So that's around 6,500 unique words. Due to the Core 2K and me starting immersing and me doing a bit of immersion before I finished it, there's a couple of dupes in there, I think, that I've just never bothered to remove. However, the I would say I roughly had around 6,500, and there were a couple of times while I was on my holiday where I did still sit there and do hours of immersion. Consequently, by the time I finished my holiday, I still had around, I think I had around 6,500, and I would say somewhere between 6,530 and 6,550 cards in my Anki deck. Oh yeah, one other thing I forgot to mention. When I left my work and became officially a NEET, technically, if you want to consider this not education, which I guess it isn't, when I embraced NEETdom for however long, it won't be long, I also uncapped the amount that I was prepared to add to Anki because I didn't have to worry about the morning commute anymore. And consequently, I started adding just as much as I wanted to Anki. Didn't care. Considering I was immersing for like a ludicrous amount of hours any given day, I would just mine whatever the hell I wanted. And this has ended up with me adding somewhere between 20 to 30 Anki cards a day, most days since then. So my kind of vocabulary and everything has absolutely skyrocketed since then. Minus the time when I was obviously on holiday. But yeah, and this has remained true since I got back from my holiday as well. I don't limit myself because I don't need to. At least not right now. Anyway, well, I can't remember how I got onto this topic actually, but regardless, since I have come back from holiday, I have been getting back into it, doing a lot more immersion, and I feel very confident in what I'm able to do. If I had to put a percentage to it, well, that would be tough. But I'd probably put my percentage as somewhere around, I want to say like 80%. I think I'm being a bit harsh on myself. With lookups, it can get damn near like 100% most times. It's very, very, very rare for me to ever come across a sentence that, with lookups, I still can't comprehend or grasp the meaning of. Does happen, but it's really rare actually. And considering how much I immerse, I'm pretty happy with that. I'm very happy with where I've ended up. Absolutely floored that it only took a year of AJATTing to get there. Now, you could turn around and say, you're still an idiot. It's not been a year. You've been doing it more than a year due to what you did with the Core Decay and everything. It would be a fair point, but at least in terms of how long I've been AJATting, and that's where I would consider the majority of my progress to come from, that's really only been a year. And if you really wanted to tack on any time to that, I would say you could tack on maybe half a month to a month based on the stuff I did before. That's how much I think it kind of tied into it. Certainly, I know with RTK, I stopped repping it relatively early on. I didn't mention it, but I repped it for about because I finished it in about 3.5 months, and then I repped it for about another 2 months or so before I decided I didn't want to do it anymore and deleted the deck. Anyway, early on in the process, I think I mentioned how I split my time evenly between reading and listening. Late in the process, I don't really do that anymore. Not evenly anyway. I still, especially for the longest while, did try to get a certain level of reading versus listening in terms of ratio. I tried to make sure that I at least got an hour of listening every day, but I overwhelmingly wanted to focus on reading. I've been a bit lazier with that since I left my job. With work, now that I've left work, overwhelmingly, I've been focusing on reading. And what this has meant is that I do admittedly have quite a few days where I just don't feel like watching anything, and as a result I just sit there and read all day. I sit there and read whatever video game it is all day, and I pretty much just play text-heavy video games at this point. So it's a lot of reading that I'm doing, really. Now, I would like to rectify this by kind of forcing myself back into the do an hour of listening every single day again. Especially because I do recognize how important listening is. But really it comes down to, is there anything that I want to listen to? I don't know. I'll try and make it better anyway. Now, one other thing that I want to mention is the tools that are available, because I'm not just going to list them off like an encyclopedia or anything. You don't have to worry about that. But namely, I think they're worth mentioning in the context of how they affected my confidence with immersion and my confidence in my ability to tackle different methods of Japanese. Early on, reading was an absolute chore because the only tool that I knew about was, well, with regards to finding kanji and finding out readings and everything, was I had to pull up my phone and draw the kanji out. Now, if you just cringed listening to that, I don't blame you, because doing that for every single word that I didn't get that had a kanji in it, especially in the beginning when I didn't know any other words that would use the kanji to be able to just type them out and nick the kanji from there, it was utter pain and made reading a massive slog. And I do think this contributed to why I found listening so much easier. And since then, around midway through, I learned about OCR and decided to give it a shot. I downloaded Clio like in Cleopatra, and I've been using that to work as an OCR. It has been night and day, the difference it has made to my immersion. If you read and you don't use OCR, and obviously you're not using any kind of read it unless you just highlight things with Yomi-chan, I highly recommend looking into getting it, because you're not always going to be able to hook things, and when you can't, this tool is an absolute godsend. It makes me feel so much more confident to approach things because I know I'll be able to look up the words with relative ease. It doesn't mean that you're always able to do it because, especially earlier on after I downloaded it, there were still so many words I didn't understand that I would just feel like I would just be spamming the OCR button, and I hated that. But it is absolutely worth it. Yomi-chan, I'm sure, needs no introduction. Pretty sure they've actually ended development on it and are working on a successor, but Yomi-chan has been fantastic, letting me have a dictionary open at all times. Usually I will, because I have a bunch of monolingual dictionaries just loaded up into Yomi-chan, it lets me just hold shift over any text I see online that covers it. Very useful tool. You can load bilingual and monolingual dictionaries, but what I tend to do is I have bilingual dictionaries in there, and then for monolingual dictionaries I usually just have a G-Show tab open. Simple enough, it does what I need it to. And yeah, Yomi-chan's a fantastic tool. I would highly recommend checking, if I had to recommend anything, I would highly recommend checking out the Moe Way. They have a fantastic kind of guide for how to set everything like this up. And my next tool that I'm going to mention comes from there, Textractor, another godsend of a tool. If you can successfully hook a game with Textractor or a visual novel, Textractor will make lookups so effortless that it makes even the OCR look like a lot of work. Because a lot of the time with the OCR, you have to hold Alt and it's Alt and Q for Cleo, and then you draw a box over the kanji that you want to look up, or the word, the word that you want to look up, basically. And obviously I don't look up just kanji on their own, but you draw a box over the word that you want to look up, and you have to kind of sometimes a bit finicky and doesn't always get it right, so you have to kind of mess with the box to make it pick up the right, or make it guess the right kanji with this predictive thing, but or its reading thing, whatever. With Textractor, if you can make Textractor work on a particular file, you bypass all of it. Textractor just basically nicks the text straight from the game, and you can have Yomi-chan open in its own dictionary tab. That's just using Alt and then Insert, bringing it up on your browser. And if you just let it select that it copies from clipboard, a line of text scrolls through in the game and instantly goes onto Yomi-chan. You can just click any word, or you can just glance over and just immediately see any reading for it. It is an absolutely amazing piece of software. And this made me so confident to approach some games like Trails in the Sky. I was able to hook Trails in the Sky. It was a little scuffed because I didn't know what I was doing in the beginning, and I got rid of the regex filter. So I have a bunch of other stuff in a lot of the text boxes that are there, but it's a small problem. Either way, I've been able to hook Trails, and it made going through such a text-heavy game so much easier. Tools are absolutely worth looking into how to use. They will save you, and they will make things so effortless. Now, output. I've not really output yet. There have been a couple of times where I've been forced to output. These are pretty much entirely the fault of one of my other friends that I met at university, the dude from Hong Kong, and this guy is a pretty well-traveled guy. He knows a lot of good restaurants and things like that, and he sometimes is in the UK. Met him at university. He was a student there with me, but nowadays he kind of travels all over different countries. When he comes to the UK, a lot of the time we have ended up going to Japanese restaurants, and the only time in which I've ever really had to output is when this guy has taken me to a Japanese restaurant and immediately just tossed me straight under that bus. You can imagine how hard he throws me under the bus there. He'll turn to the waitress and he'll say, "Oh, this guy speaks Japanese." And, well, good luck. It's a good job that I can bloody comprehend with how they'll turn to me and then immediately start speaking to me in Japanese. But that's those times, which are only actually a couple of times, are the only times I've ever actually had to output. And I keep that to a minimum, even though I don't actually personally kind of subscribe, if that's the right word, to the idea that outputting early is necessarily going to hurt your Japanese a ton. I think it's worth, when that idea comes around, to consider that when you look at someone like Matt, for example, the amount that dude gets praised in videos based on having incredible pronunciation, and I mean, he did output early. The fact is, any mistakes that you make or anything can be fixed with time. And now I understand that the general consensus is, obviously, the reason why people say don't output early isn't because it'll ruin you forever, but because it's easier to make good habits than to have to fix them later. I do also think it's important to just internalize the fact that whatever happens, You can fix your mistakes later. It can happen, and if you are dedicated enough, you will fix them later. That said, anyway, I've not output yet because I'm not really in an environment where I need to. And as a result, I feel like I can kind of wait until I feel a little bit more comfortable with outputting before I do. So that's what I'm going to do. I do plan on this year probably trying to output, probably just over typing. But I do plan on starting output this year, probably towards the tail end of the year. But my focus, at least as of the moment, is just input. Now, in terms of right now, what's next, I guess? I would like to... Oh yeah, that's a good point. Pitch accent. I'm going to bring up pitch accent next, actually. So, around very early on, in the first 6 months, I learned the basic pitch accent patterns. I knew pitch accent existed. I knew it was something that I was going to need to deal with, but I kind of just learned the very basics, just the fact that there were 4 pitch accent patterns, that Japanese had those 4, and then I said, alright, sweet, 4 pitch accent patterns, cool. And then I moved on and just did all that immersion and just didn't really think about it, other than thinking, don't forget this exists. Around the 10 to 11 month mark, it was sometime like right after the 9-ish month mark, I decided to take the leap and start actually studying pitch accent. And I jumped in and checked out Dogen's Guide to Japanese Phonetics. Learned a few bits and pieces from there. I've not finished the entire guide. I've watched like barely any of it. I've watched maybe the first 10 to 15 episodes, and other than that, I've just been immersing. To be honest, the reason why I've not really done any more than that is predominantly just because I wanted to get a grasp of the basics and then try to apply them by just immersing, but also just because immersing is fun, and so I wanted to immerse. Now, in the time to come, I would like to do a bit more pitch accent study in terms of learning rules or whatever. So I'd like to do a bit more of Dogen's course, try out the stuff that he has to teach in my immersion. But certainly now I know one of the things that I've changed with regards to pitch accent was I took my sentence card type and I added a new field for pitch accent, and I just fill that in with whatever number is in the dictionary for the down step, where applicable anyway. Because obviously I have a couple times added some somewhat common some phrases that are common, but either way, pitch accent for those is not always immediately straightforward. But regardless, I would like to learn more to basically get a bit better at pitch accent anyway. But I also kind of feel like I won't really start properly solidifying pitch accent and how my pitch accent is until I properly start outputting. Maybe I'm wrong, but at least that's how I feel. But I have noticed that there are some cases where, based on just you hearing the word enough times, you kind of just naturally get the pitch accent right. And there are a lot of cases where I will guess the right pitch accent just naturally because I've been exposed to I guess, words of that type often enough, and you start to kind of intuit a few of the pitch accent rules just by paying a basic amount of attention. But also another thing is that I found that you start to kind of get used to the natural ebb and flow, the natural cadence of Japanese as it's spoken in a sentence. And so when Japanese is spoken outside of that ebb and flow and sounds a little bit different, it sounds wrong. Now, this is most noticeable when obviously foreigners talk Japanese, which I don't hear that often, but it jumps out at you. It just feels like something's wrong. Now, I've not gotten that down to like the word level yet. Like, if someone says the pitch accent of a word wrong, I'm not, depending on the word, I'm not necessarily guaranteed to notice that it's wrong. Depends on which one it is. If someone were to say, like, take the word, well, how to say cake in Japanese, you would always say keiki and not keiki. If someone say keiki, I think I would probably flag that as something's wrong here. But who knows? I've not heard it said like that, so I couldn't say for sure. I'll see how I get on. But yeah, certainly I do want to focus a bit more than I have been on pitch accent going forward. And it's not like I've focused on it all that much, so man, that's not saying a lot. But regardless, that's my point. Now, what kind of stuff have I been using to immerse? I have, in the beginning, I watched a lot of slice of lives. I also tried watching a lot of stuff that I'd seen before. This was stuff like, well, I watched Kiniro Mosaic and Gotchusa. I think I said that already. But I mean, currently I've been recording for an hour 20, so hey ho, what are you going to do? I watched Made in Abyss, Maid Dragon, and I watched Angel Beats. That was one that I'd seen before. I watched Kami Can't Communicate. What would I recommend? Well, all of those I would say are fairly good for beginners. I think some are better than others. Obviously, slice of life ones are better than non-slice of life ones. One thing I've actually found that I've really come to love throughout my time doing Japanese is I never saw it coming, the magical girl genre. I just ended up really enjoying it. They tend to be full of some really good stories. Shocker, I know, considering that I have Symphogear in the background this entire time. Symphogear is one that I watched towards the end of the year and has been my favourite one so far. In fact, I would go so far as to say that out of everything that I've watched, I would probably consider Symphogear to be one of my favourites. I can't say overall it's been my favourite thing, just because I've seen a lot of good stuff and it would be really hard to rank it. But what would I recommend? If you're a beginner and you're looking for something good to read, I can't recommend Ghost Trick enough. There's a lot of stuff in there that is relatively simple. There's some stuff in there that isn't, but it's not a difficult first choice for something. Just make sure you have OCR to hand. I played through Ghost Trick with by drawing out every kanji I don't recognize, and it took me like a month to finish that game doing it that way. Doing it with OCR would probably make it take a lot less time. But Ghost Trick is also a charming and really enjoyable game. Other than that, I would definitely recommend manga like Yotsubato. I think I would definitely recommend something like Sailor Moon. Other than that, it's tough to really recommend much with regards to reading for when you're a beginner. But I don't know. If maybe I'll think of something else. Yeah. In terms of anime, obviously slice of life stuff. I've already mentioned a few. I would say, I don't know, if you do enjoy like slice of life, something like My Senpai is Annoying is good. Uzaki Wants to Play, or however that's called. Uzaki-chan wa asobitai. That's good. Toradora is a bloody classic. I had seen it before watching it for immersion, but Toradora is bloody good. I can't recommend that enough. Something relatively simple like Oni-chan wa Oshimai is a pretty well animated one, and that's pretty good. For another one, I think Bocchi the Rock. It'll teach you some music terms as well as just generally being a charming, enjoyable anime. And Maid Dragon, definitely try Maid Dragon. Maid Dragon's really good. In terms of, I guess, when you get a bit further on, I would probably at this point I'd recommend checking out something like Angel Beats. I think Zombieland Saga is also really good. Definitely try that. Made in Abyss is a bit harder, but it's also really flipping good if you can get past some of the stuff in there. It's not for everyone, but it is really good if you can look past it. I thought Cyberpunk Edge Runners was okay. A lot of people really loved that. I thought it was alright. Konosuba is another classic. That one's actually. I remember that being harder than I thought it was going to be. But I watched that around just after the 6-month mark, so yeah, don't know how I'd find it now. One part that I'd seen this in English before, English subbed before, so it wasn't that bad because my fiance flipping loves this show. I've never seen her be so obsessed with the show. Mobile Suit Gundam, The Witch from Mercury. That one, Suisei no Major. That one I found that one pretty good. I found that one pretty easy to follow. I think that one's relatively straightforward. I think if you're around the 6-month mark, that would be a good choice there. I really enjoyed the one anime that everyone watches when they learn Japanese, Attack on Titan. Everyone always talks about that. I'd always wanted to watch it, but I never got around to it until I started learning Japanese. I watched it. I was immediately hooked by the incredible first season. And then that kind of tapered off as I carried on throughout the other seasons, and the genres slowly kind of changed for Shingeki no Kyojin. But hey ho. It's fully out now anyway, so if you do get hooked into it, there's a lot of content for you to go through. It's exciting, it's gripping. Even if you don't understand everything that's there, I do think you'll love it. I think I enjoyed Boku Dake Gai Naimachi. I think it's called Erased in English. That was really flipping good, and not too difficult either. I would recommend that. Maho Shoujo Lyrical Nanoha. That was really good. The first 2 seasons were absolutely incredible. I wasn't a big fan of the 3rd season, and then Vivid, the 4th and 5th season, Vivid and Vivid Strike, I haven't really watched. But the first 2 seasons of that were very, very, very good. I really enjoyed them. Here's another one. If you're a beginner, sorry, I know this is late. If you're a beginner, but you don't want to watch Slice of Life, try Kimetsu no Yaiba, Demon Slayer. I didn't really like it. I thought it was kind of mediocre, but you'll probably find it more exciting than Slice of Life. I think that Komi Can't Communicate is good. I think you'll enjoy that. I might have already mentioned that. Man, why don't I look like a fool if I've already mentioned that? Here's one that I think that I've not seen a lot of people recommend. When you get past like the 6 month mark, I would suggest check out the Kamen Rider series. I'd never checked that out before learning Japanese. I jumped in and watched Kamen Rider W as my first, and it hooked me in a way that I hadn't been hooked since I watched the first season of Attack on Titan. I fell in love with Kamen Rider W. It's so good. And it's acted as well, rather than being voice acted, meaning that the speech isn't always as clearly enunciated as it tends to be in anime, meaning that you get a little bit more experience with less, I guess, clear Japanese. Not saying that it's necessarily speech level, but well, I'm not sure whether it is or not, because it's not like I've exactly listened to much speech so far. However, it's not the same as anime, is I guess the point. Since then, I have actually watched Kamen Rider Gaim, which was also really good, and I would highly recommend that as well. Those are the two Kamen Riders I've seen so far. I do plan to watch other Kamen Riders, but I give it time between each one because it gives me time to let it sink in, and also Kamen Rider so far has been so good that I've got to be careful, because when I watch it, it kind of overshadows everything around it. I would absolutely recommend Symphogear. There are absolutely parts where the story does not really make much sense, but it is so cool that I allow it. I thought I was past the point of being able to look past stuff like that. I thought that I was at the point where it's like, if the story doesn't make sense, then it just doesn't really work for me. But Symphogear proved me wrong. So cool. God, Hibiki is so cool. I love it. Definitely worth a watch. In terms of video games, I think the further along you get, I would definitely probably recommend this more towards the end of the first year, and that would be obviously the Kiseki series, the Trails series in English. Don't be an animal. Start with Sky. It's slow, but you don't have to finish it in one sitting. Just jump around between a few things, but always go back to it. By the time you get to the end of it, it'll probably hook you with its ending, or towards the end. It's dense, there's a lot of text. In the first 2 Trails games alone, there's enough text to... I believe there's enough text to dwarf the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So very, very good for a lot of vocabulary acquisition. Of course, this is largely dependent on how many people you talk to, but either way, the story's really good. The characters are really good. I can't recommend it enough. And then it goes from Sky into the Crossbell Saga, which is Zero no Kiseki, Ao no Kiseki, or Trails from Zero, Trails to Azure. Those two are really good. After that's Cold Steel, Trails of Cold Steel, or Sin no Kiseki, which, well, I can't say I'm the biggest fan of Cold Steel, but if nothing else, if you've not played through the Kiseki series, I don't really need to sell you on Cold Steel, because if you do sit through the other arcs of Kiseki, you will play Cold Steel, because you'll understand at that point how good the series is. It's a JRPG set. It's a text-heavy JRPG set in one continuous world on one continent. The Sky series, Sora no Kiseki, or Trails in the Sky, is set in the Libelle Kingdom, which is bordered by 2 big superpowers, Erebonia and Calvard. Cold Steel is set in Erebonia with a different set of characters. And then the aforementioned cross-spell duology of games is set in another country that borders Ereboni and Calvard by itself, and all of these characters like get to meet some of the previous like protagonists, things like that. It's while being protagonists of their own with their own story. It's cool. There's an overarching plot. I love it. I can't recommend it enough. I would recommend. I would cautiously recommend something like Genshin Impact. I've actually played a lot of gacha games. I don't really. I make a point to not to be careful with recommending this kind of stuff, because if you're not comfortable with spending, gacha is a very predatory monetization method that if you get hooked on it, can drain you of a ton of money. So I would say be very wary of that. But if you are someone who can kind of deal with that without obviously draining your entire life savings into it, Genshin Impact is another text-heavy game that gets really flipping good, especially by the time you get to Sumeru, which was my favorite region. And there's a lot of, and despite being a gacha game, Genshin actually has a game attached to it. I would, in terms of that front, like I said, I play a lot of gacha games because, for better or for worse, I do feel like they, a lot of the time, do have a lot of text and have kind of stepped it up in their story based on what it once was with them. I can't easily recommend something like Fate Grand Order. However, I do have to begrudgingly acknowledge just how good the Babylonia chapter is. And then a lot of people say Lost Belt 6 as well. I'm a bit of a contrarian here, but I preferred Babylonia. Anyway, the other story chapters are kind of meh, at least before Babylonia, so whatever. That's a middling recommendation from me, I guess. One I do kind of recommend that'll probably get me some funny looks is Nikke. Nikke's story is kind of, the text that they use is kind of bite-sized, and they use relatively straightforward sentences, which means that actually mining Nikke is really easy, and the story is actually quite gripping. Hard to imagine, I know, considering this is just the jiggly game, but well, that's what it's known for anyway. But the story is actually it's surprising. I was trying to think. I think I would recommend the Disgaea series. That's kind of a very fun series to get into. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And yeah, other than that, I think in terms of manga, the Made in Abyss manga is really hard to understand if you're a beginner. Definitely not for beginners, but if it's anything like the anime, it's good. I've not read much of it. Another one that'll get me funny looks, I'm sure, that I have read a few volumes of, was actually Kodomo no Jikan. I was recommended that by my fiance. I went into that knowing its reputation, not expecting much, and I was very pleasantly surprised. It was actually really good. At least what I read of it was. It was the only manga I've ever read that's actually made me cry. So yeah, there's that, I guess. But yeah, there's a ton of different content. But ultimately, I think the most important thing that I've really done with this is pretty much everything I engage with is in Japanese, and has been for a while. If I can do it in Japanese, I do it in Japanese. if it's not available in Japanese, depending on the thing, usually I just won't do it. It's very rare. It has to be basically a game that other people want to play with me. So if my brother wants to play something with me, on the rare occasion that we play something together, and that thing is not in Japanese at all, I suck it up and I just play it without Japanese. But almost every other case, if it can be in Japanese, it is in Japanese for me. It doesn't matter what game it is, doesn't matter how little you pay attention to the text. I want to be surrounded by Japanese all the time. So this includes titles like, well, my brother he wants to play like Risk of Rain 2 with me. I played it in Japanese. Doesn't really help much because it's not exactly a text-heavy game, but every little bit helps. I don't want English text. I want to be surrounded by Japanese, and this is the outlook that you need to take if you want to do AJATT, I think. Anyway, what's next? I think the next thing that I want to do is, well, outside of pitch accent, I just want to keep immersing. My goal for this year is to get to 10,000 sentences. I think I've mentioned already that my total sentences as of right now is around, it's closing in on 6,600. My goal is to get to 10,000 sentences this year, as well as to, towards the end of the year, start outputting, just through text, I imagine, anyway. But yeah, that's my goal anyway. And yeah, not really sure if there's anything I missed. If there is, I don't know, and I remember it, I'll put in a comment or something. Maybe. I don't know. Depends on what I think of. If you have sat this far, well, thanks for listening, I guess. I'm sure I've been extremely thrilling to listen to. It's like the middle of the morning where I am in rural, like the middle of nowhere England. Yeah, never been to Japan. Didn't mention that at all. One day I'd like to go, but I'd like to get better first. Yeah, if there's anything else if anyone actually does end up watching this, and you do think of any questions to ask me, pop in the comments and I'll answer. But yeah, if I can do it, anyone can do it. Thanks for watching anyway, and yeah, see you next time, whenever that is. I couldn't be bothered to make 3 or 6 month update videos, so who knows, maybe the next one will be at 2 years. Pass. Don't know. But yeah, thank you very much for watching, and see you next time, whenever that is.